Evelyn, where are you? Why is our house just gone? Ethan's voice, laced with panic, was music to my ears. I savored the moment, the sweet retribution for his betrayal. Yes, Ethan, I had it demolished. Everything you left behind is gone. But why? His disbelief was palpable. Because, Ethan, some things are too broken to be fixed, I replied, a cold calmness in my voice. I am Evelyn, a 45-year-old caregiver, married to Ethan, a 46-year-old marketing executive. Our son, Lucas, had just moved out after college, leaving an echo in our home and apparently in Ethan's sense of responsibility. The day Lucas left, Ethan chuckled, Evelyn, he's not a kid anymore. Let him make his own mistakes. I remember feeling a twinge of annoyance, masked by the relief of seeing them both smile. But that annoyance, that small crack, was about to widen into a chasm. Just as I thought we'd rediscover each other, life took a sharp turn. Dad fell in the yard. Broken bone, maybe. I'm heading to the hospital, Ethan informed me one evening, his voice oddly detached. Should I come with you? No, I got this. Don't worry. But worry I did. At work, I was distracted, feeling an impending sense of doom. Returning home, I found Ethan lounging on the couch, as if his father's fracture was just another minor inconvenience. He'll need a cane, Ethan said casually, as if discussing the weather. This wasn't just about a cane. This was about Henry, Ethan's father, who had been living alone since his wife passed away 3 years ago. Despite our offers, he had refused to move in with us, valuing his independence. Now the decision was made for him. We should live with your dad, right? I asked Ethan, already knowing his answer. Sure, why not? He's family. The family home, where Ethan grew up, was more suitable for Henry in his condition. It was settled. We would move in with Henry. Little did I know, this decision was the first step towards an irreversible change, a change that would shatter the very foundations of our life together. That evening, as I looked around our soon-to-be-left condo, memories of Lucas's childhood flooded my mind. There was a bittersweet tang in the air, a mix of nostalgia and foreboding. Ethan's indifference was like a growing shadow in our home, but I was too preoccupied with the logistics of the move to confront it. In my heart, I hoped this move would bring us closer, not just to Henry, but to each other. How wrong I was. The move happened faster than expected. Henry, frail but smiling, welcomed us. Sorry to be a burden, he said, his eyes reflecting a lifetime of memories held within the walls of his home. You're not a burden, Dad. You're family. I assured him, while Ethan just nodded, his mind seemingly elsewhere. That night, as I lay in bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the old house, I couldn't shake off a feeling of unease. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed more distant than ever, lost in thoughts I could not reach. It was the beginning of the end, the start of a journey that would lead me to the ultimate act of defiance. Little did Ethan know, his world, our world, was about to come crashing down. The walls of Henry's house, steeped in history, were now silent witnesses to a growing rift. As days turned to weeks, Ethan's late returns from work became the norm. His once warm smiles were replaced by a cold, distant demeanor. Evelyn, he's my father. I know how to handle him, Ethan snapped one evening when I expressed my concern about his lack of involvement with Henry. I bit my tongue, the bitterness of his words stinging me. It wasn't just about Henry, it was about us, about what we were becoming, or rather what we were losing. Julia, Ethan's sister, visited one weekend. Her concern was palpable as she watched us moving around each other like distant planets in a decaying orbit. Are you sure about this, Evelyn? Living with Dad, I mean. I can take him if it's too much, Julia offered, her eyes searching mine for a hint of reluctance. I forced a smile. No, Julia, it's fine. We're fine. But we weren't. Ethan's aloofness was growing into a chasm that I could no longer bridge. His excuses for staying out late became more frequent, his explanations more flimsy. Evelyn, I'm just grabbing a drink with colleagues. Networking, you know, he would say, his words lacking the conviction they once held. Networking or escaping? I found solace in Henry's company. Our conversations, filled with stories of the past, were a balm to my growing loneliness. In those moments I felt a connection, a belonging that had started to fade with Ethan. One evening, as I helped Henry with his exercises, his voice trembled. Evelyn, you've been like a daughter to me. I hate to be the cause of any trouble between you and Ethan. I held his hand, assuring him, Henry, you are not the problem. Please don't think that. But deep down, I knew the problem wasn't Henry. It wasn't even Ethan's late nights. The problem was something far more sinister, a rot that had set in the core of our marriage. Ethan's indifference was now a gaping hole, swallowing any remnants of the love we once shared. His absence, both physical and emotional, left me grappling with a myriad of unanswered questions. Was this our new normal? A life of silent meals, unshared beds, and unspoken words? I lay awake that night, listening to the creaks of the old house, each groan echoing the turmoil in my heart. I missed Ethan, or rather, the Ethan I thought I knew. The man who now lay beside me, lost in his own world, was a stranger. As the days blurred into each other, Ethan's neglect of both Henry and me became more pronounced. His once excited talks about his day at work dwindled to monosyllables. His late-night returns were now expected, and his excuses a mere formality. The gap between us widened, filled with unspoken accusations and stifled emotions. I was living with a ghost, a shadow of the man I married. It was during one of these sleepless nights that I stumbled upon the first thread of the web of deceit Ethan had been weaving. A thread that would unravel everything we had built together. As I lay there, staring into the darkness, I made a decision. I would no longer be a spectator in this crumbling facade of a marriage. I was going to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. And if my suspicions were correct, Ethan would soon learn that some actions have irreversible consequences. The stage was set. The actors were in place. The drama of our lives was about to reach its crescendo. The days turned into a monotonous cycle, with Ethan's apathy casting a shadow over the household. His late returns became so routine that I stopped asking where he had been. The silence between us grew louder, filled with unasked questions and unvoiced suspicions. One Saturday, I decided to confront him. "Ethan, your father feels neglected." "You're hardly here," I said, my voice a mix of frustration and desperation. Ethan scoffed. "He's fine, Evelyn. Stop being so dramatic. I have my life too, you know." His words stung, and I recoiled at his dismissiveness. Was this really the man I had loved for all these years? As I tended to Henry, his gratitude only deepened my resentment towards Ethan. "You're too good to us, Evelyn. I'm sorry for my son's behavior," Henry whispered during one of our walks. "It's not your fault, Henry. I just wish Ethan could see what he's missing," I replied, my heart heavy with unshed tears. Julia's visits became my solace, her presence a stark contrast to Ethan's indifference. "Evelyn, if you ever need to talk, I'm here," she offered one afternoon as we sipped tea in the garden. I nodded, grateful for her support, but too proud to admit how much Ethan's neglect was affecting me. The final straw came on a rainy Thursday evening. Ethan had not returned home, and his phone went straight to voicemail. Worried, I waited up, the clock ticking away my patience. He stumbled in past midnight, reeking of alcohol. "Where were you?" I demanded, my worry turning into anger. "Just out, Evelyn." "Stop being such a nag," he slurred, brushing past me. That word, nag, echoed in my mind, igniting a fire within me. I was not a nag. I was a wife concerned about her crumbling marriage. The following week, my suspicions turned into reality. While cleaning, I found a receipt in Ethan's jacket, a hotel receipt dated for a night he had claimed to be working late. My hands trembled as I read the details. Room service, a bottle of champagne, and a single room for two. The betrayal sliced through me, each word on the receipt a confirmation of Ethan's infidelity. My heart raced, a mixture of anger, pain, and disbelief coursing through me. I confronted him that evening, the receipt clenched in my fist. "What is this, Ethan? Explain this to me," I yelled, my composure shattered. Ethan's eyes widened, then narrowed. "It's not what you think, Evelyn. It was just a business meeting that went late." "A business meeting? With champagne in a hotel room?" I spat, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Ethan's silence was the only answer I needed. The truth hung in the air, a tangible presence that neither of us could deny. That night I lay awake, the weight of Ethan's betrayal crushing me. I had been a faithful wife, a caring stepdaughter, and yet this was the payment for my loyalty. As dawn broke, a cold resolve settled over me. Ethan had made his choice, and now I would make mine. It was time for Ethan to learn that every action has consequences. I would no longer be the silent victim of his deceit. The plan started to form in my mind, a plan that would shake the very foundation of Ethan's world. He had underestimated me for the last time. Evelyn, the doting wife and caregiver, was about to show Ethan a side of her he had never seen, a side that even I hadn't known existed. The stage was set for my revenge, and I was ready to play my part to perfection. Ethan's days of betrayal were numbered, and he wouldn't even see it coming. Armed with the bitter truth, I was a storm brewing on the horizon. Ethan's betrayal had lit a fire within me, and I was determined to make him pay. My plan for revenge began to take shape, fueled by each lie he had told, each night he had left me alone. Julia visited again, and this time I didn't hold back. "Ethan's having an affair," I confessed, the words tasting like poison on my lips. Julia's shock quickly turned to anger. "That bastard! How could he do this to you, to Dad?" "We need to do something, Julia. I won't let him get away with this," I said, my voice steady with newfound resolve. "We'll figure this out, Evelyn. I'm with you," Julia assured, her hand gripping mine. The opportunity presented itself when Ethan casually mentioned an upcoming business trip. "A week in New York. Big project," he said, avoiding my gaze. "A week, huh?" I mused, a plan forming in my mind. "Have a good trip." But it wouldn't be the business trip Ethan was expecting. No, this would be the week when his world would come crashing down. I started my preparations the moment he left. With Julia's help, I gathered evidence of his affair, hotel receipts, phone records, late-night messages. Each piece was a nail in the coffin of our marriage. Next, I contacted a lawyer to discuss divorce and property rights. I would not only leave Ethan, but I would also strip him of everything he held dear. His betrayal had cost him more than just our marriage. It would cost him his home, his comfort, his security. "Evelyn, are you sure about this?" Julia asked, concern etched on her face. "I've never been more sure of anything," I replied, a cold determination in my voice. While Ethan was living it up in New York, oblivious to the storm brewing back home, I was executing my plan with precision. The house, Ethan's childhood home, was the first to go. I hired a demolition crew, explaining that the house was old and needed to be torn down for safety reasons. As the bulldozers tore through the walls, I watched with a sense of grim satisfaction. This was more than just a physical demolition. It was symbolic of the destruction of our marriage. Next, I arranged for the sale of the land. The property was in my name, thanks to Ethan's careless handling of the paperwork. The land would fetch a good price, and the money would be mine alone. As the days passed, my plan unfolded flawlessly. I was no longer the betrayed wife. I was the architect of Ethan's downfall. Finally, the day of Ethan's return arrived. I waited for his call, the anticipation a sweet torture. "Evelyn, where are you? What happened to the house?" Ethan's voice was laced with confusion and panic. "I had it demolished, Ethan. And the land, it's been sold," I replied, each word a dagger to his heart. "What? Why? Evelyn, that was our home," he stammered, his voice a mix of disbelief and despair. "It was a house, Ethan, not a home. And now it's gone, just like our marriage," I said, my voice calm and steady. "But why? How could you do this?" Ethan's plea was pathetic, a far cry from the confident man he once was. "You made your choice, Ethan. Now I've made mine. Goodbye." With that, I hung up, cutting off any further pleas or excuses. As I sat in the silent room, a sense of liberation washed over me. I had done it. I had taken back control of my life. Ethan's betrayal had shattered our marriage, but it had also awakened a strength in me that I never knew I had. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor. And as I looked ahead to my new life, free from lies and deceit, I knew one thing for sure. Ethan would never forget the name Evelyn. Ethan's world had crumbled, and I was the architect of its downfall. The day he returned, I waited, knowing he would confront me. As expected, his car screeched to a halt where our home once stood, now just an empty lot. "What have you done, Evelyn?" Ethan bellowed as he approached, his face a mask of shock and anger. "I've freed myself from a life of lies and deceit," I replied calmly, my resolve unshaken. "This was my childhood home. How could you?" His voice cracked under the weight of his loss. "Your childhood home? You mean the house where you neglected your father and betrayed your wife?" My words were sharp, cutting through the air between us. Ethan staggered as if my words were physical blows. "Evelyn, please, let's talk about this." "Talk? Like you talked to your mistress?" I countered, the bitterness in my voice unmistakable. "You don't understand. It was a mistake," Ethan pleaded, his eyes searching for any sign of the love that once bound us. "A mistake repeated is a choice, Ethan, and you chose her over us. Over everything we built together, I said, the finality in my voice echoing in the empty space. Ethan looked around, desperation taking hold. But where will I go? What about my things? Your things are in storage. As for where you'll go, that's no longer my concern, I stated, devoid of any sympathy. I never thought you could be this cruel. Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Cruel? No, Ethan, I'm not cruel. I'm just no longer your fool, I replied, turning away from the ruins of our past. Ethan's voice faded as I walked away, leaving him amidst the debris of his choices. I had exacted my revenge, not out of cruelty, but out of respect for myself. As I drove away, the weight of the past years seemed to lift off my shoulders. I was no longer bound by Ethan's betrayal or the confines of a loveless marriage. In destroying our physical home, I had built myself a new one, a sanctuary of self-respect and dignity. Ethan had taken so much from me, but he couldn't take away my strength or my ability to start anew. I had closed the chapter on Ethan and our life together. Now it was time to write a new story, one where I was the protagonist, not a victim of someone else's script. Ethan's downfall was the price he paid for his betrayal. As for me, I had gained something far more valuable, my freedom and a chance to rediscover who I was before I lost myself in our marriage. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it was a road I looked forward to traveling. Ethan was a part of my past, a chapter closed and left behind. The future was mine to shape, and I embraced it with open arms and a heart free of the chains of betrayal. The aftermath of the house's demolition left Ethan in a state of shock and desperation. A few days later he called, his voice laced with a mix of anger and disbelief. Evelyn, we need to talk. Meet me at the cafe on 5th, please. I agreed, curious to see how he would try to spin this tale. At the cafe, Ethan sat hunched over, a shadow of his former self. Evelyn, why are you doing this? You've destroyed everything, he blurted out as I sat down. Destroyed everything. Ethan, you did that when you chose to have an affair, I replied, my tone even but firm. That was a mistake. But this, what you're doing, it's unforgivable. His voice cracked, his facade of control crumbling. A mistake. No, Ethan, a mistake is forgetting to pay a bill, not cheating on your wife. I countered sharply. You can't just take everything from me. The house? The money? What about me? Ethan's plea was pathetic, tinged with selfishness. What about you? What about me, Ethan? Or did you forget that there were 2 people in this marriage? I challenged. Ethan's face contorted with frustration. You're being unreasonable. You're ruining my life over a fling. A fling? Is that what you call breaking our vows, our trust? My voice rose, attracting glances from nearby tables. Evelyn, please, we can fix this. I'll end it with her. We can go to counseling, Ethan offered, desperation seeping into his voice. Fix this? There's nothing left to fix, Ethan. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it, I said, my decision clear and unwavering. I'll lose my job, my reputation. You don't understand the consequences, he pleaded. The consequences? You should have thought of that before. Hanish, as for your job and reputation, those were never my concern, I replied, my tone icy. Ethan slumped, defeated. So, what now? A divorce? Yes, a divorce. And since you're so concerned about consequences, I've recorded this conversation. Admitting to your affair will make the proceedings much smoother, I revealed, watching as the color drained from his face. You recorded me? Ethan gasped, his eyes wide with shock. Yes. It's time for you to face the consequences of your actions, Ethan. You've lost more than just a house. You've lost a wife who loved you, a family that respected you, and a life that you took for granted, I stated, standing up to leave. As I walked away, I didn't look back. Ethan's voice, calling out to me, was just a distant echo. I had closed that chapter of my life, and there was no turning back. The price of betrayal was high, and Ethan was paying it in full. I had not just sought revenge, I had sought justice for myself. The future was uncertain, but it was a future where I was no longer shackled by Ethan's deceit. I was free, and that freedom was the sweetest victory of all. The dust had settled, and Ethan's world was irrevocably altered. The divorce proceedings were swift, fueled by the incontrovertible evidence of his affair. He tried to argue, to fight, but the truth left him with no ground to stand on. As I sat across from him in the lawyer's office for the final signing, he was a mere shell of the man I once knew. Evelyn, please, can't we rethink this? Ethan's voice was a desperate whisper. There's nothing left to rethink, Ethan. You made your choices and now I've made mine, I replied, my voice steady and resolute. With each signature, I felt a chapter of my life closing, a chapter filled with pain, betrayal, and ultimately liberation. When it was over, Ethan tried to speak, but I cut him off. There's nothing more to say, Ethan. Goodbye. Leaving the office, I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was no longer Ethan's wife. I was Evelyn, free and unbound. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's life continued to unravel. His job was lost, a casualty of the scandal. His reputation, once impeccable, was now tarnished by the truth of his indiscretions. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was living in a small apartment, a stark contrast to the life of comfort he once knew. His mistress had left him, unwilling to deal with the fallout of their affair. Ethan was alone, a consequence of his own making. As for me, I started anew. The money from the sale of the land allowed me financial freedom, and I found peace in my independence. I reconnected with old friends, took up hobbies I had long forgotten, and found joy in the small things. Julia and I remained close, our bond strengthened by the trials we faced together. "You're stronger than you ever realized, Evelyn," she said to me one evening over dinner. "I guess I am," I replied, a smile playing on my lips. My new life was simpler but richer in ways that money couldn't buy. I had respect, dignity, and a sense of self that no one could take from me. Ethan tried to reach out a few times, but I never responded. That chapter of my life was closed, and I had no intention of revisiting it. I often thought about the house, the symbol of our broken marriage. In its destruction, I had found my strength. It was a drastic step, but it was necessary for me to break free. Now, looking ahead, I saw a path filled with possibilities. A path where I was the author of my own story, no longer a character in someone else's drama. The road to recovery was not easy, but it was mine to travel. I had survived the storm, and in its wake, I found a peace I never knew existed. Ethan's betrayal had shattered me, but in those broken pieces I found myself, and that was the greatest victory of all. In a world where I thought love was a language I'd never speak, his words, "Would you consider going out with me?" struck a chord I never knew I had. I stared blankly at Jude, stunned by his bold invitation. Me, the office recluse, being asked out by one of our most personable clients. It seemed unfathomable. "I know this seems out of the blue," he continued with a warm smile, "but I've wanted to get to know you better for a while now. You intrigue me." I felt my cheeks flush as I scrambled for words. My instinct was to politely decline and retreat to my safe solitary office, but something in his gentle eyes chipped away at my guarded facade. I'd love to," I managed, the words escaping before I could overanalyze their implication. His face lit up with pleasant surprise. "Yeah, great. Are you free Friday night?" I nodded, suddenly feeling shy as scattered memories of high school dances and my college roommates' many suitors flashed through my mind. My scant romantic history felt woefully inadequate preparation for an evening alone with Jude. As we exchanged numbers, planning the location and time, apprehension and excitement dueled within me. I had always admired Jude from afar, drawn to his affable confidence and easy charm. But I never imagined his interest would extend to someone like me, the office introvert who preferred headphones and spreadsheets to happy hours with colleagues. That Friday evening, I agonized over my outfit, changing 3 times before settling on a simple black dress and heels. I barely recognized my reflection, a far cry from the jeans and blouses I lived in at the office. As the Uber approached the restaurant, my nerves kicked into overdrive. "You can do this," I told myself. "Just make conversation." I was greeted by the scent of grilled meat and raucous laughter as I walked through the doors. The buzz of a Friday night crowd set my anxiety on edge. But then I spotted Jude waving at a small table nestled in a quiet corner. His smile eased my tension. "You look beautiful," he said, pulling out my chair. I lowered myself down, smoothing my dress self-consciously. "This place is really nice. Do you come here a lot?" I asked. As we fell into casual banter about local restaurants, my nervousness gradually gave way. Jude's presence was disarming, engaged but relaxed, funny but thoughtful. Our conversation drifted seamlessly from work to hobbies to childhood memories over steak frites and wine. I barely touched my food, too caught up in his entertaining stories to think about eating. Jude jumped from topic to topic with enthusiastic ease, while I mainly listened, interjecting occasional questions or reactions. Despite my tendency to avoid eye contact, I found myself stealing glances at his bright amber eyes as he spoke. After the plates were cleared, Jude glanced at his watch. "I didn't mean to keep you so late. I know it's a work night." "Oh, that's okay," I said quickly. In truth, I had barely noticed the passing hours in his company. As we walked out to catch our Ubers, Jude gently brushed his hand against mine. The subtle contact sent a spark through my skin. "I had a wonderful time, Alara," he said softly. "Would you want to go out again next weekend?" I nodded, suddenly unable to find my voice. As my Uber pulled up, Jude leaned in, planting a delicate kiss on my cheek. "Good night," he whispered before turning to leave. I watched him disappear into the night, my fingers touching the spot his lips had grazed. The chord he struck within me now hummed with new life. I knew in that electric moment that my world would never be the solitary place it once was. Our bliss lasted only a few short years before life threw its first major obstacle at us. Barely 2 years into our marriage, Jude's promising startup collapsed almost overnight, the victim of embezzlement by a duplicitous business partner. I still remember Jude's ashen face when he told me the news over the phone. "It's all gone, Alara. Everything." His voice cracked as he explained how his conniving co-founder had drained their accounts before disappearing without a trace. My heart ached for my kind-hearted husband, knowing how much blood and sweat he had poured into his company. I rushed to meet him, enveloping his slumped frame in my arms. "I'm so sorry, Jude," I whispered, holding him tightly. "We'll get through this. I promise." In the months that followed, we slowly adjusted to our new financial reality. The lease on our trendy apartment was not renewed. Designer brands and upscale restaurants were replaced with thrift stores and home cooking. Jude fell into a period of despair, struggling to pull himself out of bed most mornings, much less send out job applications. Eventually, our dwindling savings forced my hand. One late night, Jude came home to find me sitting solemnly at our kitchen table. "We can't avoid it anymore. One of us needs a steady job with benefits," I said gently. Jude stared at the floor silently before sinking into the chair across from me. "I know," he finally replied, his voice laced with shame. "I'm trying, Alara. These past few months have been difficult." I reached for his hand reassuringly. "Let me job hunt for a while. My background may make it easier for me to find something quickly." Though it wounded his pride, Jude eventually conceded. Within a few weeks, I leveraged my financial analysis skills into a mid-level position at a thriving corporation. Meanwhile, Jude half-heartedly submitted applications, his enthusiasm still dampened. Upon receiving my first paycheck, I surprised Jude with dinner at our favorite upscale restaurant, but instead of delighting him, the extravagant evening seemed to underscore his feelings of failure. "We can't afford this, Alara," he said sullenly, eyeing the polished surroundings. "Not on an administrative assistant's salary." Stung by his thoughtless words, I bit my tongue to restrain a retort. Later, I tried gently broaching his comment, but Jude refused to discuss it further. As I drifted to sleep that night, an uneasy feeling stirred within me. The dynamics of our relationship were shifting, but to what end I did not yet know. Over the next year, Jude cycled through short-lived contract jobs while my career advanced rapidly. Each of my promotions and pay raises seemed to drive the wedge between us in deeper. Pleasant dinners would suddenly flip into moody silences if I mentioned work. Offhand comments about my lucky break stung. But Jude's biggest blow came on the heels of my latest achievement, a senior manager role that nearly doubled my prior income. I arrived home thrilled to share the good news, only to find Jude pacing angrily. "I can't keep doing this," he erupted before I could even speak. "Watching you succeed so effortlessly while I flounder. Why did I bother with college when you make twice my income without even trying?" I stood speechless, stricken by his verbal attack. "Jude, that's not fair," I finally responded, fighting back tears. "My job requires 80-hour weeks and extensive travel. You know I would happily trade places." "Oh, please," he scoffed. "You love the fancy office and business trips. Don't pretend this hasn't been the best thing that ever happened to your career." As his cruel words echoed through our silent apartment, an image of the gentle man I married flickered in my mind. The man now standing before me, twisted by envy and pride, felt like a stranger. My heart broke realizing the Jude I loved may be gone forever. The months following Jude's outburst dragged on, our relationship strained by unspoken hurts. My demanding job kept me traveling frequently, leaving little time to mend the widening rift between us. During a rare extended stay home, I was surprised to find a sharply dressed Jude waiting with 2 glasses of wine when I returned one evening. "Congratulations are in order," he declared, handing me a glass. "I started a new position today, at Richardson Financial." I stared blankly, struggling to process this sudden news after so many months adrift. Jude continued explaining his role as a junior broker at the prestigious firm while I nodded mutely. "This is wonderful news," I finally managed. "What prompted you to apply there specifically?" Jude refilled our glasses, his mood buoyant. "I realized I couldn't sulk forever, and I know Richardson was on your dream company's list from business school." I detected an unspoken message in his pointed remark. By choosing a firm I admired, perhaps Jude hoped to prevent any envy on my part. I brushed the implication aside, focusing on my relief at this positive development. Over celebratory pasta, Jude enthusiastically outlined his plans to quickly climb the corporate ladder. I smiled encouragingly, though uncertainty lurked at the back of my mind. Jude's checkered employment history left me skeptical of his staying power in the notoriously cutthroat environment, but I kept silent, not wanting to dampen his fledgling confidence. "Well, I'm off to bed," Jude said, kissing my cheek after dinner. 5 a.m. comes early when you actually have somewhere to be." I awoke the next morning to find Jude already gone. A quickly scrawled note on the counter wished me a nice day. As I surveyed the remnants of last night's feast, I felt a palpable emptiness. I longed for the days when lazy Saturday mornings meant lingering in bed together before tackling chores or enjoying leisurely brunch dates. Over the next few months, Jude and I mostly passed like ships in the night. My global travel increased substantially with a major product launch, leaving me perpetually jet-lagged. Meanwhile, Jude rapidly advanced at Richardson Financial, regularly working 12-plus-hour days. We traded quick voicemails and the occasional takeout dinner, too exhausted for meaningful interaction. But slowly, our financial state improved with Jude's rising income. We moved into a more spacious apartment closer to Richardson's headquarters. Jude leased a shiny BMW to match his new professional persona. My pay bumps had bought us time, but now Jude's earnings afforded us true stability. I noticed small changes, too. Jude's expensive haircuts, new custom-tailored suits, and sudden golf habit with the guys from work. During my fleeting visits home, Jude entertained me with amusing corporate stories, though names and context often blurred together. "Richardson sure keeps you busy, I commented one night after Jude dismissed a call from a colleague. "Yeah, it's nonstop, but that's life in this industry," he replied. As he detailed his latest high-profile case, Jude's face glowed with vigor and pride. The shadow of resentment and defeat I had watched haunt him these past years finally lifted. My husband had returned, though in an unexpected form. With our careers firmly stabilized and finances on the rebound, I optimistically hoped our marriage, too, could now begin healing. Surely this new upward trajectory marked the end of our relationship woes. Or so my naive heart believed at the time. But unbeknownst to either of us, an unpredictable storm brewed just over the horizon, one that would change the course of our lives forever. I quit. Jude's fork halted midair, a bit of egg dangling precipitously. "You what?" I took a deep breath, grasping my mimosa tightly. "I quit my job as of today." Jude slowly lowered his fork to the plate with a gentle clink. "I don't understand. Why would you quit without discussing it with me first?" "I know, I'm sorry," I replied. It was an impulsive decision, but the timing felt right. I went on to explain my growing disenchantment with the corporate rat race, the endless slog of meetings and metrics, losing sight of any real purpose. And then an email landed offering me a lucrative freelance financial writing position. Before I could overthink it, I resigned. Jude rubbed his temple, processing this bombshell development. I braced myself for criticism over my rash choice. "Well, I support you," he finally said. "I know how miserable all that travel made you. Just promise you won't become some starving artist now," he added with a wink. I laughed, relief washing over me. "I make more per hour now than with a salary. We'll be fine." In my euphoria over dumping my corporate shackles, I failed to notice Jude's smile not quite reaching his eyes. Over the next few months, I settled happily into my new remote freelance role. The flexible schedule afforded me time to pursue photography and pottery classes, long-neglected passions. With Jude frequently working late, I cherished reconnecting with these creative interests. One evening, while crafting a vase, Jude arrived home unusually early, and not alone. I turned to find an immaculately dressed elderly woman clutching his arm. "Alara, meet my mother Mara," Jude announced. "She'll be staying with us a while." I froze, struggling to process this unexpected guest now surveying my clay-splattered apron with thinly veiled disdain. Jude had never once mentioned his mother coming to visit, much less live with us. "Wonderful to meet you," I managed faintly. "How long exactly was a while?" In the uncomfortable days that followed, I learned Mara's husband had recently passed away after a long illness. According to Jude, the loss left her too fragile to care for their suburban home alone. I empathized with her grief, even as her imposing presence invaded our home. Mara scrutinized our apartment with pursed lips. The modern artwork, my orchid garden, Jude's beloved jazz vinyl collection. Everything seemed to offend her traditional sensibilities. Without asking, she rearranged furniture to allow proper flow, and stocked our kitchen with bizarre health concoctions. Worst of all, Mara's constant, unsolicited advice infuriated me. She critiqued my writing career as a flighty pastime, suggested I dress more modestly, and outright condemned the premarital intimacy Jude and I shared, in our own home. I urged Jude to intervene about his mother's behavior multiple times, but he merely shrugged, responding, "It's just her way. She means well." As Mara's presence infiltrated each room like an invasive species, I sensed my sanctuary dissolving. Lying awake at night, I listened anxiously to Jude reassuring his mother through the thin walls after every minor stressor. The man I once considered my closest confidant now reserved that role for the intruder down the hall who eyed me like a troublesome child. And somehow I had allowed this. The passive husband and domineering mother now controlled our home, while I willingly relinquished my power just to keep the peace. The realization churned a growing fury I could no longer contain. The shrill ringing of my cell phone jarred me from sleep. I fumbled groggily for the device, Jude's name flashing urgently on the screen. "Hello, Jude?" "Alara." His voice was strained with a chilling edge I'd never heard before. "The police just left. Get back here now." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone, my groggy mind racing through possible emergencies. Sirens blaring past my hotel had awoken me just an hour ago. Were we robbed? Surely no mere household mishap warranted Jude's cryptic tone. I hurriedly dressed and raced home, pacing tensely as the Uber crawled through early morning traffic. I arrived to find an eerie quiet, no signs of forced entry or robbery. But the acidic scent of bleach hung cloyingly in the air. I moved cautiously through each room, ledgering the undisturbed valuables with confusion before noticing the bathroom. Harsh fluorescent light spilled into the hall from the ajar door. Inside, I gasped to discover blood smeared across the newly scrubbed tile walls. The metallic stench overwhelmed me. I clutched the doorway in horror. What had happened here? Just then Jude emerged, his shirt and hands still speckled with scarlet stains. Upon seeing me, his mouth twisted into a snarl. "There you are. This is your doing," he hissed, jabbing his finger toward the lurid scene. "I told the police what really happened, even covered up your rage tantrum, but if you ever lay hands on my mother again—" "What? Jude, I just got home. What on earth are you saying?" I cried. His bizarre accusation made no sense. But before I could plead further, Mara appeared behind Jude's shoulder, an exaggerated slump in her usually ramrod posture. "I tried so hard to keep the peace between you two," she whimpered pathetically. As Jude comforted his clearly unharmed mother, their distorted narrative finally registered. They had concocted this elaborate scene to frame me as unstable and violent. My hands curled involuntarily into fists as I marched toward Mara, ready to confront her deceit. Sensing imminent confrontation, Jude swiftly positioned himself between us. "Officer Costas allowed us to handle this discreetly, since Mother isn't pressing charges," he said. "But he assured me they'll be keeping close watch." I opened my mouth to refute Jude's outrageous threat, but stopped short. Their determination to paint me as an aggressor was suddenly clear. Engaging would only legitimize this infuriating fabrication. Without a word, I turned my back on them and retreated outside to calm my spiraling thoughts. Over the next week, Jude and Mara carried on with their fraudulent charade. She wore a wrist brace for her sprain, while neighbors and Jude's colleagues received anonymous warnings about my concerning temper. My existence became an endless gauntlet of thinly veiled antagonism and betrayal. Soon after, while enjoying a rare solitary afternoon, the doorbell's obnoxious chime broke my focus. I opened it reluctantly, worried Jude had forgotten his keys again, only to find an unfamiliar gentleman clutching a thick folder. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Anthony Giles, Social Services," he stated. "I'll need to speak with you about the incident on the 16th. Before I could protest, he stepped inside, flicking open his folder dramatically to begin his interrogation. As Mr. Giles bombarded me with patronizing questions, implying my guilt, fury and frustration welled up dangerously. But I knew reacting emotionally would only legitimize his suspicions. So I calmly recounted my factual innocence despite his transparent agenda against me. Fortunately, he left empty-handed but warned further outbursts would involve children's services regarding my ability to safely parent. Shutting the door firmly against his retreating back, hot tears finally spilled down my cheeks. The realization crashed over me. To save myself, I had to abandon this house of lies. No matter the cost. I awoke well before sunrise, Jude's whistling snores grating in my ear. Slipping silently from beneath the sheets, I tucked my pre-packed bag by the front door and contemplated my next move. Today was the day. I would finally confront Jude about the cruise brochures and love poems stashed in his gym bag that confirmed my worst fears. For weeks, an unshakable feeling in my gut whispered Jude was having an affair. When traces first surfaced, I rationalized them away, not yet ready to destroy our already fractured bond. But the mounting evidence now demanded action. As I brewed coffee, I had no intention of drinking. My mind raced through potential scripts for the impending confrontation. Jude often left his work phone unattended on the counter, my chance to gather final proof. When I heard the buzz of a new text notification, my pulse quickened. I tapped the phone gently, stomach churning as the lock screen preview exposed everything. Lurid messages from a contact named Lola Peach filled the screen, leaving nothing to doubt. As I scrolled in horror, hot tears spilled down my cheeks at the graphic descriptions of past rendezvous and enthusiastic plans for reconnecting post-cruise. In that moment, something severed deep within me. The tenuous threads still clinging to hope or denial now snapped entirely. I backed away from the damning device, resolve cementing. Today the pretense would end. I busied myself with mundane tidying, awaiting signs of life from the bedroom. Before long, Mara emerged scowling. News of my resignation last week from the volunteer board she convinced me to join had earned persistent cold shoulders. "Morning, Mara," I offered politely. Her responding sneer said everything. As she shambled off to the couch, Jude finally surfaced. I steeled myself for the showdown ahead. "Jude, do you have a minute to chat?" I asked as casually as possible. He glanced at his watch distractedly while gathering work items scattered around the kitchen. "Can it wait, babe?" "Big presentation today," came his dismissive reply. In the past, I would have uttered a timid, "no problem," before sending him off with a forced smile, but not today. "I'm afraid this can't wait," I said, firmly blocking his path. "We need to discuss your upcoming cruise and Lola Peach." I watched the color drain from his face. "What are you talking about?" he sputtered unconvincingly. "I don't know any Lo." "Save it," I snapped. Months of suppressed rage now roared loose. "I'm done with your lies. I saw the disgusting messages you left open on your phone. How long did you think you could keep screwing this whore behind my back?" His lips pressed into a rigid line. Before he could reply, an anguished wail erupted from the couch. We turned to see Mara stagger toward us, heaving with dramatic sobs. "I can't bear this cruelty," she cried. "Jude, she's set on destroying this family over pure fantasy." Jude rushed to comfort her, while casting me an icy glare that screamed, "How could you upset my mother this way?" In past arguments, Mara weaponizing her emotions could shame me into silence, but her histrionic meltdown only hardened my resolve now. Without another word to either of them, I stepped outside, slamming the front door with an earth-shaking finality. As my Uber sped away, I grasped the full reality of what I was fleeing, a pathological narcissist twisted by jealousy. Her weak-willed puppet son, so easily manipulated. Their toxic delusions threatened to subsume me completely. Well, not anymore. Today my emancipation began. In the weeks following my dramatic exit, I immersed myself in dismantling the intricate web of lies Jude and his mother had woven. Meticulously documenting their misdeeds became my obsession. I dodged Jude's endless calls and texts, ranging from righteous indignation to desperate pleas for reconciliation. Responding emotionally served no strategic purpose. Instead, I quietly retained cutthroat attorneys and private investigators, methodically building irrefutable cases of infidelity and slander. With my evidence nearing courtroom-ready status, I decided the time had come for a final confrontation on my terms. I invited Jude and Mara to meet at a posh restaurant downtown, sending the address anonymously to pique their curiosity. Right on time, I spotted Jude entering with Mara clinging possessively to his elbow. Good, they took the bait. Allowing them a few minutes to settle uncomfortably at the table, I finally made my entrance. "You actually came. Bravo," I announced acidly, relishing their shocked expressions at my abrupt arrival. Without waiting for a response, I opened my briefcase and theatrically flung 2 manila folders onto the tablecloth, their damning labels clearly visible. Folder 1, Infidelity. Folder 2, Emotional Abuse and Slander. Jude visibly paled while Mara's razor-sharp eyes narrowed. "Whatever nonsense this contains holds no weight," she scoffed. "You always were drama queen." Ignoring Mara's delusional barbs, I focused intently on Jude. The folder contents will speak for themselves, but allow me to summarize. For the next excruciating half-hour, I calmly detailed Jude's long-running affair and sexting habits backed by photographic evidence, private investigator reports, and credit card receipts. Mara sputtered baseless denials until Jude finally admitted guilt in a choked whisper. "Well, she drove you to it," Mara shrieked. "A wife should meet her husband's needs to prevent wandering eyes." Slamming my palm violently on the table, I cut her repulsive tirade short. "You will not defend his behavior. He is a grown man responsible for his abhorrent choices." Turning my glare back to Jude, I continued, "And according to the investigator, Lola Peach is just one of several women you've maintained relations with." Jude hastily tried placating me by questioning the ethics of hiring spies, but my bone-chilling stare silenced further protests. After a few moments, I resumed my diatribe by exposing their slanderous hoax, portraying me as violent and unstable. "I have signed affidavits from the responding officers and social workers strongly disputing your perjured claims," I concluded, shoving the paperwork toward them contemptuously. Watching Jude visibly withdrawing into his seat like a scorned child while Mara seethed quietly was profoundly satisfying. I rose calmly from my seat, gathering the damning evidence now scattered across the table. "Consider this your one warning to cease spreading vicious lies about me to salvage your shredded reputations. I still have ample ammunition left if necessary for courtroom proceedings." Leaving them speechless amidst the upended wreckage of secrets and lies, I strode briskly towards sweet freedom. The bindings tethering me to their dysfunction now dissolved fully. I was finally free. Watching the moving truck disappear around the corner, I sighed deeply. The bittersweet pang of signing the divorce papers just hours earlier still lingered, but any residual heartache faded, standing here on the curb before my very own food truck, its cheerful teal paint gleaming brightly in the afternoon sun. My hard-won independence never tasted sweeter. In the 18 months since I confronted Jude and Mara with their deceitful transgressions, much had changed. With an excellent attorney's help, I leveraged the extensive documentation of Jude's philandering against any sympathy for Mara's fictitious abuse claims. The judge took a dim view of their elaborate hoax and utter lack of remorse, as he deemed in the divorce proceedings. Stripped of his polished veneer before the court, Jude acquiesced quickly to my terms, eager to avoid further public scrutiny. The settlement awarded me full ownership of our lavish apartment and 75% of all remaining assets. Jude slunk away in disgrace to lick his wounds, Mara in tow. She had attempted clinging to false reconciliation promises, but I wouldn't be moved. In the quiet aftermath, I blossomed in solitude's fertile soil. My writing career flourished now that energy formerly spent tiptoeing around volatility could be channeled into professional and personal growth. I traveled widely, cultivated new friendships, and most importantly, I cooked. Having rediscovered my passion for fusing flavors during darker days, I began hosting pop-up dining experiences from our apartment. My culinary skills, coupled with charming hospitality, quickly attracted a cult following. Soon, devoted patrons clamored for my signature roasted duck confit tacos and cardamom creme brulee well beyond makeshift dinner parties. When the owner of a failing food truck approached proposing partnership, the universe seemed to align perfectly with my entrepreneurial visions. I invested a chunk of savings into revitalizing the charming little hut on wheels into a truly eye-catching mobile kitchen. Bold teal paint and twinkling string lights attracted droves of curious admirers from the outset, but perhaps most satisfying was discovering genuine romance unexpectedly. During my first promotional photo shoot for Alara's, I clicked instantly with the talented photographer Graham over sharing travel tales while scouting locations. Our coffees afterwards kindled into deeper connection. Unlike Jude's love bombing, Graham's affections grew steadily out of genuine compatibility and mutual respect. On our recent trip celebrating the new truck launch, Graham mused the stunning vineyard views looked ideal for a small, intimate vow exchange someday soon. My heart fluttered hearing this wonderful man, with no ulterior motives, speak so earnestly of our future together. Just then, my reminiscing was interrupted by the loud rumble of the first guest's arrival, my dear friend and unofficial catering assistant, Eva. She had proven an invaluable pillar of support when other fair-weather friends scattered after my dizzying descent from corporate executive's wife to scandalous tabloid feature. I embraced her warmly. "Well, no backing out now," I joked. "Did those glowing Instagram stories I sent over pique your interest?" "Are you kidding? I've been craving duck tacos all week after that preview." She laughed. "Now stop keeping me from that sublime food and go wow all these strangers." Grinning broadly, I fired up the grill with infectious enthusiasm. Tonight marked the genesis of my hard-won new existence, one defined not by toxic gazes or dancers hiding in the wings waiting to step on broken dreams. Instead, possibility and autonomy shone brightly, their rays feeding seeds for whatever rich future I chose to cultivate next. One scrumptious taco at a time.